As you can see, we're in the dark. And it's not just a belated nod to Halloween. It's a taste of what one noted journalist says could happen if a hacker managed to sabotage America's power grids. Our cover story is reported by Chip Reed.
When the lights go out, we usually know why.
Hurricane Sandy coming ashore on the East Coast.
Most of the time, we manage to get through it. But what if the power went out in a number of states, affecting millions of people for weeks, even months?
As you were researching this, did you personally find yourself getting frightened?
I think frightened is a little bit too strong, but maybe I should have been. Yes, it's frightening. It is frightening enough that my wife and I decided we were going to buy enough freeze-dried food for all of our kids and their kids.
In his book, Lights Out, veteran journalist Ted Koppel paints a grim picture of a paralyzing power outage in the form of an all-out cyber attack on the nation's electrical grid.
Who are the potential perpetrators here? Who do we have to fear the most? Is it Russia, China, Iran, terrorists, individual actors?
All those. The interesting thing, Chip, is the ones who are most capable are the ones least likely to do it.
There are some experts who say they're already in.
Oh, they are in.
They are in.
There is no question about it.
They're into our grid.
They are already in the grid. I was told that by the former chief scientist of NSA. He stated categorically the Russians are in, the Chinese are in. The Iranians may be on the verge of getting in. And then at the bottom of the capability scale are folks like ISIS, terrorist groups.
The power grid is the system interconnecting North America's supply of electricity. If one area has particularly heavy demand, power from another region can sometimes serve as backup. The downside to all this? If a hacker manages to take down an entire grid, a huge portion of the country, along with parts of Canada, could go down with it. The primary reason? Like so much else these days, the grid relies heavily on the internet.
You would think the one entity that would be ready for something like this is the Department of Homeland Security.
Yes.
Are they ready?
No. I mean, I've talked to every former Secretary of Homeland Security, and they all acknowledge there is no plan.
He says the current secretary, Jay Johnson, didn't offer much guidance either.
You described the conversation as prickly at one point.
Well, it got prickly because I kept asking, what's the plan? Why wait until disaster strikes? Why not tell him, do you have a plan? And he just sort of pointed up at a shelf filled with white binders, and he said, look, I'm sure there's something up there somewhere.
We wanted to find out for ourselves, but both the White House and the Department of Energy declined our requests for an on-camera interview. The Department of Homeland Security also refused to speak on camera. Next, we reached out to some of the big electric companies. They refused to speak with us as well.
Ted Koppel says the government basically has no plan. Is he right?
So we turned to Paul Stockton, a former Defense Department official whose duties included cybersecurity. Stockton admits
their readiness is not where it needs to be, given that the adversary continues to strengthen the sophistication of the weapons that will be used against the United States.
I don't think we're ever going to give up the internet. There are too many advantages to the internet, even if it has the capacity to wreak enormous damage. And all I'm saying is, at least wake up to what its capabilities are.
And since there's no turning back, it's important to think ahead.
So what does the average family actually need to be doing? Do they need to be, as Ted Koppel has done, stocking up on water and freeze-dried food?
I think those are very important measures. Average citizens need to be able to take care of their own families and their own neighborhoods and their own communities, and not assume that Uncle Sam is somehow going to magically bring in the cavalry and rescue them.
In the beginning of the book, before the first page, you said to our grandchildren, you named your 7 grandchildren, and then you said, here's hoping that Opie meaning you,
That's me.
got it wrong.
Right.
You think you might have gotten it wrong?
Of course. I mean, there's a possibility. Do I believe I got it wrong? No. I spent a year and a half trying to get it right, and unfortunately, I think I did.
Are we now talking about something, it's not a question of whether, but when?
That's exactly the way that the four-star general who commands CENTCOM put it. He said, it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when.
But let me just ask you this, because you said for the first time the government needs to worry about the internet being a weapon of mass destruction.
Absolutely.
But you also say, how do you prepare for something when you don't know where and when it could come from? Because it could come from anywhere.
What I'm suggesting is we need to prepare for the consequences of a cyber attack. My sense of it, though, is we're better off preparing. I mean, let's say we prepare for something that doesn't happen. Then we will at least be prepared for any other disaster that comes along.
Are we safer or more at risk than we were 5 years ago?
You know, I think that it's hard to put an absolute on that. Obviously, the U.S. is always a target. One of our greatest concerns and one of my highest priorities is national security matters. And as we've seen this threat morph and change over time, we have adapted as well. And we remain focused on identifying that threat, thwarting that threat where we can, and prosecuting it where we find evidence of criminal activity here in the U.S. Where U.S. interests are threatened, here or overseas, we will and we do take action.
What keeps you up at night?
And I think that the greatest concerns that a number of us in law enforcement face these days really are our cyber issues. Cybersecurity is a huge concern of ours as well. Those challenges are big and they are growing.